Week in Review. With massacres and protests throughout the Middle East, why aren't we hearing about Israel? How Israel's chief rabbinate is keeping converts out of the Jewish state, what social media can do for Jewish cooking, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. The perils of living in many Middle Eastern countries are being laid bare. As we go to air, an estimated 1,000 peaceful protesters have been slaughtered by mercenaries of Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. And while Gaddafi's actions stand out owing to the size of the slaughter, the use of violence and other forms of suppression in nearby countries with popular uprisings is revealing anew to the entire world the level of human rights available to populations there. It's hard to find a similar situation in which so much global attention has been paid to these issues. And what also stands out is the relative lack of attention given to Israel by the global media and political leadership. That's why the news about Israel this week is very much about how little news about Israel there is that's making the rounds. Few are talking about Israel and the peace process, and there's essentially no mainstream voice finding time to be critical of Israel's record on human rights amid the larger story here. That naturally raises the question of what will happen when all these protests do eventually conclude, and Israel is making headlines again. It seems likely that Israel's record on the rights of Palestinians will look different to the international media and world leaders when Israel's actions are cast in the new light reflected from its neighbors in suppressing protests. But a separate story in Israel is about how the Jewish state is categorizing its Jewish citizens, or rather, those the country is increasingly deciding are not Jewish citizens. For what appears to be the first time in Israel's history, some of those seeking to move to Israel have been rejected as not Jewish, owing to decisions of Israel's Orthodox-controlled chief rabbinate. The story of the chief rabbinate's new policies on conversions have been a frequent topic on TJC News over the past 2 years, with immigrants to Israel suddenly finding their Orthodox conversions declared invalid by Israel's rabbinate for the purposes of marriage and schooling. But immigration to Israel had been different and separate from the rabbinate's decision. That's now changed, as a conversion rights group has announced it has proof of multiple families having had their efforts to emigrate to Israel blocked. The implications of this are somewhat unclear, but TJC will continue to report on this story as it develops in the coming weeks. Moving from the topic of Orthodox rabbis in Israel to that of Reform rabbis here in the United States, Fox News host Glenn Beck, who's raised the ire of many liberal rabbis over his comments regarding Jewish billionaire and left-wing activist George Soros. 400 such rabbis signed on to a letter calling for Fox News to stop Glenn Beck from making these comments. Now Beck has chosen to fire back publicly against those rabbis, comparing them to radical Muslim clerics, and saying that Reform rabbis are only interested in politics, not religion. Here's that statement on his radio show with co-host Pat Gray.
When you talk about rabbis, understand that most people who are not Jewish don't understand that there are the Orthodox rabbis, and then there are the Reformed rabbis. Reformed rabbis are generally political in nature. It's almost like Islam, radicalized Islam in a way to where it is just radicalized Islam is less about religion than it is about politics. When you look at the Reformed Judaism, it is more about politics. I'm not saying that they're the same.
No, obviously not.
And they're going to take it in that. But stand in line. Mm-hmm. It's not about terror or anything else. It's about politics. And so it becomes more about politics than it does about faith. Orthodox rabbis, that is about faith. There's not a single Orthodox rabbi on this list. This is all Reformed rabbis that made this list.
But while Beck and the rabbis continue to have their fight over broadcast media, there's a new effort underway to discuss how everyday Jewish families can benefit from social media. Twitter, Facebook, and other social media are famous for discussion of all kinds of issues, and Rebecca Honig-Friedman reports on trying to bring that form of discussion into the topic of Jewish food.
Under normal circumstances, tweeting and posting on Facebook from one's phone during a panel discussion might be considered socially inappropriate, but not when that panel is about tweeting and posting on Facebook. And smartphones were never far at hand at the Metro EMA social media schmooze last week.
This is an opportunity for people to get together and understand the benefits of the new media world, to learn about new techniques, to learn best practices, to network.
The schmooze was the latest in a series by MetroEMA.com, a new social networking website for Jewish mothers. And the special focus of this schmooze was the confluence of social media and food, which Metro IMA founder Jody Samuels said was an obvious choice.
We have so many food bloggers, chefs, and so much following in our food category. Jews and food, the stereotype stands true.
And according to corporate communications professional Stephanie Grayson Zane, the panel's moderator, it's not just Jews who are blogging, tweeting, and Facebooking about food.
So far, we do not have edible social media. However, a lot of people like to bond over things like food, recipes.
And that food-centric bond is driving food-related businesses to hop on the social media bandwagon.
It is definitely an interactive conversation, and the businesses that are smart are understanding that they need to engage their audience, not just talk at them, but talk with them.
On that note, the panel featured food industry professionals and one amateur who have been using social media to promote their brands. Pastry chef Paula Scheuer, author of The Kosher Baker, Kim Amzalag, the director of sales and marketing for Kosher Inspired magazine, Tamar Ganger, who runs the website joyofkosher.com, and Yossi Horowitz, a lawyer by profession who runs a popular kosher wine newsletter on the side. With different levels of expertise and sometimes different goals, panelists shared their experiences using social media as a professional networking and marketing tool. Scheuer said she values the instant virtual community that Facebook provides.
As soon as I went on, I found this huge community of other kosher food bloggers and became friends with them so that by the time the book came out, I had all these wonderful people to help me.
Horowitz, who uses Twitter more than Facebook to promote his wine newsletter, said having an online and social media presence is now essential to promoting one's brand, a lesson he learned the hard way.
Last year, I was asked to be the judge for a kosher wine guide that was put out by the Jewish Week. And in connection with that, I got some substantial publicity, got my picture, and the New York Times picked up on it. So there was a lot of publicity around it. But because I didn't have a website or any place for people to go to sign up for the newsletter, I wasn't able to appropriately leverage it to expand my readership.
Amzalag, a longtime media professional, noted the challenge of keeping up with changing social media trends.
I've been in media for, over 25 years, mainly in magazines, and it was very difficult to, go off into the internet world and now into the Twitter world, and there are some hesitations at my age, and I think it is an age thing because younger people are like, there's nothing to be afraid of, just do it.
But even for those of a younger generation, keeping up with the pace of social media can be difficult.
You don't really realize how much time this stuff takes between the website itself and then the social media could take all the time if you wanted it to. So you have to be careful.
For more on the Metro IMA social media food schmooze, and to hear how this award-winning Jewish food writer is taking on social media, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable, IO Optimum Cable Channel 291, Time Warner Cable Channel 528, RCN Channel 268, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and Cox Cable Channel 1. For more information, visit tjctv.com.